Hello. Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Beyond Q4, Planning for 2022 Campaigns. My name is Rachel Chansky, and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at AUDIENCEX. I just want to thank you all for taking a bit of time out of your day to join us. I'm going to give this just a couple of minutes to let people finish joining us. While I do, just going to go over a couple of quick notes. First, we will be sending a recording of this webinar to everyone, so you can look out for that by the end of the week. Additionally, we will be taking some time to answer any questions that you may have at the end of today's presentation. So if you do have any, you can go ahead and submit them at any time using Zoom's Q&A feature you'll find right at the bottom. So today, we will be talking about current trends and projections, gathering and data, and a whole lot of strategy for the new year. While we've always been in an ever-changing industry, obviously we've just been through a couple of exceptional years, and we're still in a hugely transitional time with a lot of ongoing changes and major shifts happening. Here to guide us through just a bit of all that today, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Danielle Gale, our Senior Director of Strategy here at AUDIENCEX. Danielle, thank you very much for being here today and hosting this. I know it's going to be great, so I'm going to hand the show off to you.
Great. Hello. Thank you, Rachel, so much, and welcome everyone. So excited to be kind of sharing some trends we've been seeing over the year and definitely how this is going to impact the future for 2022 in terms of media planning. So let's jump into this. We have a lot of content to cover. We will be taking questions at the end. So please do send your questions ahead of time. There should be a chat button you should be able to access. And then we'll kind of go through and answer some of those questions for the Q&A session. For questions we don't answer, we'll definitely follow up in email as well. So looking at the agenda, we really want to cover specific media consumption trends that have happened over the year in 2021 and really help understand kind of what's happening in terms of audience behavior. So at AUDIENCEX, half of our clients are kind of B2C clients, while the other half are B2B. So we're going to look at just consumers, what's been affecting them and their buying behavior, and then also look at decision makers as well. And then really for planning ahead in 2022, we really want people and kind of clients and marketers to really think about branding. And then of course, we always got to touch upon the elephant in the room, which is the cookie demise for third-party cookies from Google Chrome happening kind of in the next couple of years. But again, we want to help you guys prepare. So this won't be a repeat, but just what you could do in terms of collecting data to really make your campaigns a lot stronger in the future when cookies do disappear. So let's jump into it. So really, we gathered some information from GWI and eMarketer, and really we wanted to share some just top stats of just the different consumption trends that have been happening. So over the last year in 2020 and 2021, eMarketer polled that many viewers are no longer watching their favorite TV shows when broadcast. So this is huge. And in fact, 72% of those users polled, especially ages 25 to 35, have watched shows on catch-up on on-demand services. So this is really important and a really pivotal point, and I think the pandemic has really sped this up, is the growth in the demand of connected TV. So users are no longer watching their favorite shows on kind of linear channels, but instead they're watching it on on-demand services through like Hulu, Netflix, etc. So we're going to be diving into CTV a bit later on, and we also have a separate webinar, but I definitely want you to keep this stat in mind as you think about potential new channels to plan for next year. CTV is going to be a big one. Also, to the graph of the right, we wanted to share some interesting trends we found with digital audio. So last year, digital audio, including music, podcasts, audiobooks, really occupied more time than digital video marginally, but it was less popular this year. And in fact, if you look at the different age groups to the right, the share of time spent listening to audio has fell dramatically across every single age group, except the group 35 to 44. So this is really interesting, and I want to pause here for a second. When looking at this from our strategy lens, we think a few things. First of all, we're not commuting to work as we used to do. A lot of users are still working from home. This is a great time people are listening to audio and catching up on kind of music streaming services. Also, people go to the gym, they're listening to music and podcasts, but with the different COVID restrictions on wearing masks, we've actually seen a fall in people going to the gym listening to music. So if you are testing video, we'd love to get your thoughts and kind of your comments about this stat. But then also, if you have a demographic that is that 35 to 44 range, audio could be a great test for you, as we see this age group kind of fall into more podcasts, and they're kind of catching up on more information of what's happening in the world through their different podcasts, and also listening to music as well. So this is where we see a big increase, and this could be a great channel to test if this fits your demographic. Next up, we wanted to look at the different device ownership of internet users, looking at the first half of 2020 compared to the first half of 2021, which is really interesting, and I think something that marketers really need to take note of, as this is happening across the world within other countries, is that the actual share of desktop and laptop owners have declined significantly for a second year in a row. So this has decreased from 76% to 71%. This is huge because, as we work with a lot of clients in the digital age and kind of programmatic, a lot of the creative we see and tend to run is geared for desktop, and then kind of just automatically resize and repurpose for mobile. But if you look at the next stat, smartphone penetration for internet users has finally surpassed 95%. So 95% of all internet users have access to a smartphone, and they're actually accessing the internet through that smartphone device. So what does this tell us? This tells us going into next year for 2022, we need to take a mobile first strategy. We can no longer think of desktop first and desktop only strategies when running media. We get a lot of clients come to us, they kind of tend to look at mobile differently and kind of sometimes remove it from their campaigns. However, we really need to put mobile in the forefront, just because this is where the device ownership lies and how people are accessing the internet. Even Facebook numbers, if you look at Facebook's usage, most of the audiences on Facebook are actually accessing the device and kind of the social platform through their smartphone. Another interesting kind of trend we're seeing is just smartwatches. So smartwatches, we've seen a sizable advance across all age groups from the previous year. And in fact, the device ownership has increased from 15% in 2021 all the way to 21% at the end of this year. So this is a great opportunity for brands, to really kind of find out strategies on different ad opportunities within smartwatches. But this also tells us that consumers are becoming more health conscious and aware of their health and well-being. So really, we want to think about this in our campaigns and kind of how to leverage this kind of stat and insight into our communication and kind of our creative messaging to users. Next up, we kind of wanted to focus on the fastest growing media channel we see in the US. So looking at just the programmatic share of US digital spend in terms of video, definitely CTV is growing the fastest year over year. And what is interesting is that if you actually look at, social is a big platform that a lot of advertisers go to. But in 2020, Ad Exchanger reported that there were 10 million unique advertisers on Facebook. So this means that's 10 million unique advertisers already building creative and targeting audiences on social. It's very saturated and overcrowded. If you compare that to CTV, which is one of the fastest, we still only see 120,000 unique advertisers. This makes up about 1%. So this is just a huge opportunity for brands to get out there and kind of own that space of CTV, especially with their competitors that are spending on social. If you look at the inventory now too, I'm sure as you all experience kind of watching on your devices, I get, of course, all these blank ads, from my Samsung TV saying, wait while your program reloads. So it just shows that there's so much inventory there. And so really, when we're thinking about CTV in the next year, is how to get more cost effective with this kind of supply and demand gap. And really, we want to help marketers kind of own this space, as it's a huge opportunity to get in before it gets saturated like Facebook and social. Another trend we're seeing is this thing that we like to call is social entertainment. So aside from watching CTV and catching up on on-demand shows, really the pandemic has launched users into scrolling mindlessly on social video. And the king of that, of course, is TikTok. So TikTok exploded during COVID. We all seen the stats. And in fact, we see that about 22% of all Gen Z millennial internet users used TikTok in 2020. But when you look at this last year, we've actually seen an increase of users logging in, and that increase led to a 54% increase. So again, not only are people spending more time on TikTok, but the actual videos where, people are scrolling through, kind of looking at videos, has created a lot of competition and kind of mimicking from similar brands. So we see Instagram, they released Reels, YouTube, they release YouTube Shorts, and Snapchat has sounds. So everyone's adapting to kind of this vertical, just kind of video on demand of social, where, a lot of brands can kind of own that space, really present, really cool vertical videos. And it's something we want to think about. We've actually seen users in the kind of Gen Z age range, they're decreasing their time spent on CTV and they're going to TikTok and scrolling for like 8 hours a day. So the usage for this group is quite significant. And in fact, we see crazy stats, especially from users aged 12 to 17. So year over year, TikTok has actually increased in terms of usage for this age group. So it went from 50% to 63%. The same audience we saw on Instagram actually decreased 4 points year over year, from 61% in 2020 to only 57% in 2021. Snapchat remained fairly flat and kind of stagnant, but really people and young users and young audiences are going to TikTok because it's funnier, it's a lot more positive, especially compared to some of these other social media platforms like an Instagram, where it's been kind of a news outlet, etc. So if you have a younger audience, and Gen Z are going to be the next big heavy consumers in the next 5 years, we really want to figure out ways to best activate TikTok. We also love TikTok because it's so price effective. I mean, the CPMs are so low. It's a great way to kind of leverage branding and kind of get your message out there at mass scale. So speaking of audiences, we definitely wanted to dive into kind of some of the trends, so we hear about the consumptions just on different social media channels and kind of usage, but what else is impacting kind of our consumers, and how is that going to affect our campaigns going into next year? So I'm sure, as you guys have probably experienced, there is a lot of changes when it comes to thinking of your future as an employee and for different employers. Regardless of the pandemic, 2021 was a huge notable year because it's called the Great Resignation. We have seen more so than any other year employees leaving, their jobs post-pandemic. And it's not only an implication for employers, but a lot of these changes in attitudes can be reflected in kind of B2C brand marketers and their campaign. Users are definitely thinking of, we got so much fatigue working from home. GWI actually pulled some of the 2 pain points of working from home is that loss of interaction between colleagues, and actually working from home, they're working more hours. So really the pandemic has put kind of in the forefront of how do I spend my time and how do I make the most value. We aren't going to live forever, so we definitely got to be happy in kind of our day to day. So a lot of brands are kind of looking at this trend and impact on consumers. And one, they're changing the way they're messaging to their potential customers. So we've seen Samsung, for example, really take effect on this, where launching their new phone, they're definitely speaking to the creativity, and rediscovering yourself. So we see a lot of rediscovering self campaigns from different brands, all the way from travel to consumer product goods. So you kind of want to be speaking to this and helping users get more creative about themselves and thinking of their future. So if you're in travel, definitely encouraging users to kind of get out and see the world and rediscover themselves is a great way to kind of think about what's happening. Also, with this stat, just when I kind of put my performance kind of marketer hat on, I kind of think, okay, if people are kind of out in the market looking for jobs and kind of prospecting for new opportunities, where is that time spent being on a user? So when I think of strategies in terms to hard media, I think of, okay, what about setting a potential PMP deal with like a monster.com or one of these job related sites? It's usually not the first thing to go to, especially if you're maybe a retail brand. But if users are spending their time hours a day looking at different job opportunities, they're still consumers and it's still a great time to meet them kind of when they're searching and making a change. So if you have any questions about this specific strategy, definitely get in touch. We are going to test this with a few clients and hopefully we could share the results soon. Now, when we look at, our next kind of clients, which is more of the B2B realm, we really wanted to focus on what's happening with decision makers. So some of the first trends we saw, definitely reported to us by Forrester, is that the word buyers doesn't necessarily mean a single decision maker. It actually means a buyer group. So really now 63% of all B2B purchases have more than 4 people involved. And this is a huge jump compared that 47% in 2017. So what does this mean? This means that if you're a B2B marketer, you need to start shifting your thinking of how do you reach decision makers and take a more account-based marketing approach. So instead of looking for individual titles of like CFO or senior vice president, we need to reach out to everyone in the company. We're going to talk about ways to do that a bit later on. Native and content is going to be huge. Also with this, what we're finding is that the number of interactions a B2B buyer has jumped by 10. So prior to the pandemic, the average interactions was around 17. This has increased to 27. So this just shows kind of that buying journey for a B2B consumer just to obtain information about a competing offer has increased. And in fact, buyers we found are going everywhere for information. So they're going to the brand marketer site. They're also doing research a lot on YouTube. They're also going to trade shows online, watching webinars, going to forums. So because we don't have that physical interaction, buyers need to become a bit more savvy and a bit more educated in their decision-making process. And so they're definitely coming online a lot more. And this is a great opportunity for marketers to kind of meet them in that place while they're searching for information. We've seen partners too, like Bombora. They've actually released a great segment called Surge Powered Audiences. And these are really intent based audiences. So they're able to identify through cookies just what are the decision makers and what are they in the market for based on their user behavior and browser history, as well as their search intent. So really, we want to start thinking of ways we could kind of meet decision makers when they're looking for that extra bit of education. We do this at AUDIENCEX all the time. We're doing this now by hosting a webinar. So it's really important to kind of increase your content efforts going into next year. One thing we love and a format we really hope clients take next year is kind of looking at different ways to leverage native. So we have a great partnership with Nativo. Nativo recently launched an exclusive native article format, and this is great, and we've seen some great success with clients. So what this format essentially does is a user will be scrolling online through a publisher. They'll get a standard 300 by 250 ad format. When the user clicks on it, however, they're taken to a very customizable page. I'm going to try to see if this demo plays. Hopefully you guys could see my screen. You're then taken to this custom article where, as you could see, the brand Chase has actually sponsored this content. This article also pulls in kind of the live news feed, not only from Twitter, but the client's Facebook, giving the user multiple interactions to click through and kind of meet the brand. Give me one quick second while I go back to the keynote. Thank you for bearing with me. Great. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. Give me one quick second, guys. So sorry about this. And we are back. Perfect. So that was just an example of a native article. The thing we love about this the most is that if you're a B2B brand, you want to be posting a lot of content. So this ad format in which you could custom brand an article, it could be your own content. It doesn't have to be one of their publishers. The next greatest thing is that we could actually pixel the landing page and track the users coming onto this article, scrolling through and reading your content. We can then collect that audience and use it to remarket them later at a different point in time. So again, here are some formats you could think about going into the next year, but content as a whole, especially for B2B brands, is going to be a huge win for next year. And speaking of next year, one of the things we really want clients to focus on is their branding. So branding is going to become ever more so important, and it's just going to become as important as performance. So when we're looking at the world today, we're seeing an influx of new realities. Definitely the pandemic has totally shifted how consumers are, getting content, what they're consuming, how they're getting information about brands and products. So really, you need to think of a long-term marketing strategy, and that comes down to both brand building and performance marketing. So there is no short selling the importance of being able to engage in a meaningful way with targeted consumers. But that marketing needs to be more than just kind of mid-funnel and lower funnel activations, especially in a post-pandemic world. And really what I'm talking about is that there's never an important time for brands to start driving awareness, especially because of the pandemic. What we saw with COVID-19 was that fewer people were driving to stores and shopping inside them, which means that your brand logo wasn't being shown enough to these users. Consumers are no longer seeing your brand in their face when they go to different stores, where they see on storefronts or shelves or even out of home marketing efforts. So it's really, really important that we think, okay, how do I increase my brand equity if now users are no longer seeing my brand at all? Also, when you think of the online marketing shelf, it's infinite. There's always millions and millions of brands, and it's never been easier to start a new company than today. So the increase of new brands coming into the market is just increasing over time, and this makes it really difficult for a single brand to stand out. And then finally, because of the pandemic, a lot of disruption in supply chains has really affected, consumers in pushing them to try different alternatives. I share this example. I've just become a new mom and I fell in love with, a clothing company for my son. He's just 3 months old. And coming up for the cold weather, we're heading into winter. I had to get him some nice warm clothes. I then get an email from this client saying that unfortunately, because of, the COVID and of course, supply chain restrictions, they couldn't get my order until 30 days later. But if you're a parent, and as you know, 30 days is a lot of time for a newborn and a new infant, as 30 days, my child will no longer be the size or fit into the clothes that I ordered. So this kind of forced myself to look at different options. And by doing some research and kind of being on social media, I fell in love with 5 alternative brands. eMarketer has some other great stats too about how supply chain disruptions are affecting users and their ability to go out and discover new brands. So all because of this, this is affecting brands' equity and kind of the value users place on brands. And so what do we need to do to counteract this is we need to push more brand marketing. So when you think about the full funnel approach, we have it usually split in two. We have our brand building and then we have our conversion campaigns. The best thing about brand building that we found, and I'm going to share this in a case study next, is that it drives future sales. So it might not be the quick fix, especially if you're a small startup and really driven by rigorous, hard sales numbers. But if you're thinking about long-term growth, brand building needs to be at the forefront. And when you message for brand building, really we're speaking to consumers' perception of a brand, versus conversion marketing, we're really thinking about how to influence consumer purchases. So these are two completely different messages. We see this, which I'm going to share next, is in our sustainability client. So we work with a green energy client, and we have been for a long time. And we've actually started testing some brand activity and measuring how it impact our performance campaigns. But when we are speaking in terms of brand, we're definitely taking more of an open approach to clean energy, making it more approachable and more affordable. These are kind of the terminology we're using instead of doing like saving money by switching, etc., which is something you would use for a performance campaign. Also, when you're thinking about a target audience and brand building, you want to think of a broad reach. We want to try to reach as many new potential customers as possible. Versus conversion marketing, we really want to activate those consumers that have a high intent of purchasing in the next few months, etc. So it's completely two different strategies, but yet they piggyback off of each other, and they're going to be important for next year to have both strategies in mind for your campaigns. So one thing to think about too is that when we also think of brand awareness, we think of the audience first and the platform second. This is very different when you're running a performance campaign. You tend to think of the platform first and then audience second. So what do I mean when I say this? So for example, if you're a news subscription brand, you might think Nextdoor is a great platform to test and use. This is where your audience is going to be, right? Nextdoor is an app where neighbors can kind of get information from each other and news happening locally. This is a perfect kind of channel contextually and also audience first. However, Nextdoor has some downsides in terms of its targeting capabilities. So if you're a brand and you're kind of coming to us with very hard performance goals, we might then first think of, okay, let's put the audience aside for something like Nextdoor, and let's focus on platforms that drive heavy acquisition, and let's try some other platforms like a Pinterest or Facebook first. However, if that client came to us and said, we're coming to you with a brand campaign, we might think, hey, Nextdoor could be a perfect way to increase your brand equity. So this is something you definitely want to be thinking about next year is, when you set up campaigns, you're going to have different tactics for different channels. But again, it's all going to be driving long-term growth and equity for you in the future. So jumping into the case study, I slightly touched on this. We do work with an energy client who's in kind of the sustainable, kind of a clean energy approach. And all of their efforts is going towards switching your current California Edison, for example, to this cleaner alternative. We've been working with them for a few years now, and all of their efforts so far have been very, very performance focused, which is great because they're a very nimble marketer, and we have to be in order to generate revenue for more marketing campaigns. However, last year when we looked at Earth Month and the whole kind of impact of COVID and how it started talking and related to more content around just green and sustainable living, we really wanted to test running a brand campaign during this time. So really the interest of the brand campaign was to spark inspirational yet approachable ideas around clean energy. With this tactic, we really focus on retail activation, email, paid social, programmatic video, and display. And all of the KPIs were upper funnel KPIs. So we were looking at things like VCR, we were looking at, brand lift studies, we were looking at engagement rates. But with this, because we are performance marketers at heart, we also wanted to kind of benchmark and see how this campaign did on our performance activity. So we wanted to measure and evaluate the CPA volume before and after. So I'm going to share with you some of the results. So first, what we found was the actual conversion funnel volume at the bottom of the funnel, aka search, climbed significantly and along the same curve as the awareness campaign. Also, our retargeting pool increased because more people were being driven to the site. This means we were able to create a bigger pool of retargeting efforts that led to better acquisition strategies for the short-term fixes. And then the most important exciting result we found was that the average time to convert declined by 15%. So this was indicating to us that customers were able to move quickly through the funnel because they actually knew more about the brand instead of just getting a first time really call to action acquisition creative. So if this is a big takeaway for any brand campaigns, is that this could actually increase the time that or lower the time that users convert. Also, we just saw a great increase in our search volume, especially around brand keywords. Google's volume rose by 45%. So overall, like brand messaging could really impact not only future sales, but we saw in the short term an impact on just our future kind of retargeting pools and that time to convert. So that's kind of, going into next year, we really want to focus on branding. But again, we can't ignore the big elephant in the room, which is the cookie deprecation. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, as I'm sure you guys all attended about 10 to 20 webinars this year all about cookies demise. But if this is the first time you're hearing it, just be aware these are some of the targeting capabilities that will be affected. Some of these that are really important is frequency capping, how many times we show an ad to a user within a certain time frame. Also, it's going to impact our view through attribution. So really, how are we going to measure media effectively if we can't get that view through conversion activity measured? And then finally, it's going to impact behavioral targeting. To me, cookies provide a huge barrier when you're advertising on the open web. So when this goes away, what are we going to be left with? Really, we're going to be left with is first-party data. So next year is the year all of you marketers out there need to focus on building that first party data. And I'm going to share some tactics on how to do that. So you'll still be able to use second party data from, accompanying publishers, and you'll be able to use your own first party data from like email addresses from your consumers, etc. So next year, while we still have the time, we want to think about, okay, how can I effectively collect first party data? Some ways we could do this right now is through online tracking. So again, we could provide analytics to a brand client's website, and we could track that entire user on, what pages are they reading, the time spent on certain product pages, what are they viewing, where are they going, etc. Another big data point that a lot of retail clients focus on is transactional data. And this could be good for B2B clients. This could be good for just normal kind of like B2C products and services. Really, we find with transactional data is that savvy companies use this data to really identify new trends and help them understand different audiences and how to engage with them. So for example, a brand might see, okay, one product is selling out quicker than others, so I'm going to shift my marketing message to kind of piggyback and accelerate that, that transactions of those users. Next is online marketing analytics. So again, customers today could still do things like A/B testing between different creative variants and kind of different creative sets of audiences. And this will kind of build a baseline of trends that you could use in the future when cookies do go away. So if you haven't done any creative A/B testing, definitely focus that on next year. You definitely want to find the nuances between each messaging and each product that you sell. One thing too that clients could do, which we don't see a lot of clients do, is social media monitoring. So social listening is a great tool to pick up on trends, just how people are engaging with the current world and kind of the different market influences. But also it provides like a way for companies to really kind of own that space and kind of get into the social conversation and have a public opinion. And this really helps businesses shine, as you know, we see more companies kind of coming in talking about QSR, talking about different world matters, etc. And then finally, you know, we really hope that each marketer looks at their form fill and really kind of find out ways to collect more data from users. You know, instead of just adding a quick, simple email, you know, maybe try to get a phone number, try to ask some information about that user, maybe their household income, etc. We want to collect as much data as we can because it's going to provide a user better experience in the future, but we're going to be able to take that data and use it when cookies disappear. So this kind of brings me to our last slide. So really with the cookie demise, we really want clients to think about an email collection campaign next year. We haven't seen anyone done this yet, and it's really, really important because cookies are a great way to match users to cookies in a post third-party cookie deprecation. So definitely run some email sign up campaigns. There's plenty of ways to do this. We see this a lot happening in retail. And I'm sure you saw this over the Black Friday and kind of Cyber Monday holiday weekend. If you went on to any retail site, the brand asked you to kind of sign up for your email address and get an additional 10% off or 15% off your Black Friday order. So this is a great tactic that any client could use to kind of get more emails and kind of get more first party data. Another tactic that I saw over the holiday weekend was, you know, brands kind of committing to, you know, users signing up and taking a pledge. And by sharing their pledge for like a better world or, you know, a better holiday season, they then get a 15% off. So again, you can make this kind of data collection a lot fun for users instead of the typical kind of value exchange. The next thing we want clients to focus on next year and planning ahead is working with direct publishers. So publishers are still going to own a ton of rich data about their own audiences, and you're going to be able to access that through second-party cookies. So right now is a time to kind of figure out who are the best publishers out there for your audience and what kind of data sets do they offer and have that really show that your customers exist within their platforms. The next is being more contextually relevant. And I don't mean this by in terms of the content where users are browsing. You definitely want to have a contextual first kind of strategy going into next year, but also you want to be relevant by each social platform. So take a step back and look how users are using the different social media platforms. You know, a user goes on to Pinterest for a very specific tool and a very specific user journey than they do when they go on Facebook. When users are going on Pinterest, it's usually to get like recipe inspiration, travel inspiration, versus Facebook, they're, you know, catching up with friends, you know, hearing the latest news, etc. So you want to take this into account in your marketing strategies, and you want to be contextually relevant for the actual platforms themselves and how users are using those platforms. So that's kind of what I have for you guys. You know, we talked a lot about brand building, which is going to be really important next year. Also figuring out ways to build upon your first party data, but also keep in mind the different media trends and the consumption trends that are happening and the implications affecting kind of consumers and also B2B decision makers. If you do have any questions about a specific format, you know, we've been exploring audio, please get in touch with our sales team. We'd be happy to work with you on kind of your planning for next year. And I'm going to hand it off back to Rachel, who's going to leave it here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was awesome. We do have a couple of questions to get started with.
Great.
So the first one we have is specifically for e-commerce brands. What are some key advertising platforms that you'd recommend leveraging in 2022?
Yes, great question. Definitely CTV. Again, as we're seeing, just a huge opportunity of growth, CTV is a great way, especially for e-commerce brands, to build upon that brand equity and get their name out there. One tactic we've actually been using too with CTV is using it as a remarketing play. So for users coming onto your site and actually falling off that purchase funnel, we actually retarget them with a CTV ad to get a bit more sticky in that brand affinity in their brain before making a purchase. Also, social Pinterest is a great platform for any kind of e-commerce or D2C brands. A lot of users are going there for shopping inspiration, especially for the holiday season. Users are going to Pinterest for gift giving ideas, etc. That's like a perfect platform to test and use if you are in e-commerce.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We also have one more. What's the best way for a brand to get started with advertising on?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Rachel? I think the internet
Um,
cut out.
yeah, sorry about that. What is the best way for brands to get started with advertising on CTV?
Yeah, the best way is to come and speak to us. No, just kidding. All jokes aside, the best way is definitely making sure your creative fits CTV and its environment. Because again, it's not necessarily linear. So it could be very expensive to make a TV commercial spot. The best thing about CTV is that you could repurpose some of your digital video assets. So if you want to get started with CTV, I would definitely think creative first. Is there any video assets you could repurpose in a cost-effective way? And then really you could come and speak to our team about, okay, how do you approach CTV with all the different connections? If you want to advertise within a specific category or a specific network, how do you access it through the likes of a Hulu or, you know, um, the millions way Xbox, etc. So there's plenty of ways to get into CTV, but it's worth having a conversation with someone who's kind of knowledgeable in the space, which is someone like our team, and also think about your creative as well.
Well, that is fantastic. Oh, and we have another question here. Do you have a strategy for allocating brand awareness advertising budget and acquisition advertising budget? Is it an even breakdown or should one be getting more?
That's a great question, and it totally depends on your sales cycle and the type of business you run. There's so many different factors in terms of budgeting. First, I would address your business goals. Do you have a certain sales number or revenue target to hit? Who is your current audience and what is that size of the addressable audience? So again, that's really going to impact your budgeting. And then also, what are the short-term and long-term goals? So if you have a heavy short-term goal where you need to hit a specific revenue number, we might allocate a bit more budget to performance tactics versus brand marketing. But if your outlook is more long-term, and especially too, if you have a brand that could be factored into a specific holiday or an event, we might heavy up some brand dollars around those activations, like we did for our energy client around Earth Month. So it really depends. It's hard to say. It's never going to be, one or the other. It really comes down to your sales cycle, your business goals. Is there any kind of holiday or activations you could work around? And then what is your audience size in that addressable market? But again, speak to our team because that's something we do day in, day out, is we help brands kind of decide their budget based on the size of the market and kind of the different factors affecting their business and their sales cycle. Good question.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that that is all of the questions that we have right now. But
Amazing.
of course, if anybody have any further questions, you can always reach out to us. Our email address is right there, hello@audiencex.com. So,
Great.
of course, we are always available to answer any questions you can have and connect you with Danielle or anyone else on our strategy team who can help you out.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We're going to give you 15 minutes back of your day, but really appreciate all of you guys joining and taking the time to hear about some insights we've learned over the year and how it's going to impact next year.
Great.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.